What's up, y'all? What's up, y'all? What's up, y'all? What is up, you all? I got balder. All right, let's talk about it. I don't really need an intro for this one. I'm sure most of y'all came here with questions in your mind, and I hope I can provide some answers. You might find it interesting. You might find it funny. You might find it sad. You might even find some advice. But as long as we're digging for treasure, please keep in mind that if you only came here to judge, these are real problems and real situations that real human beings have to deal with. So just chill, all right? Because it can happen to anybody. We're all just 300 Happy Meals away from obesity. So let's just assume the position and let me educate you. So here it is. How do obese people have sex? Well, we don't. At least, I don't. Good night, y'all. All right. Nah, I mean, this is a pretty broad question, but what I think y'all want are some specifics. So I didn't exactly take the time to do any door-to-door surveys, but I did think of a few questions that people might have, and I'm going to answer them one at a time. Please keep in mind, however, that I can really only speak on what I know and to a lesser degree what I've been able to research. Therefore, my answers to these questions are going to be framed in the context of a male-female interaction. Truth be told, when it comes to sex and obesity, there seems to be little to no information that pertains to any other type of couple. And that sucks. So if there's anything I missed or anything you'd like to know more about, please drop a comment below and I'd love to discuss it further or maybe even make a follow-up video. So do you guys break the bed? I'm not gonna lie, I've done this before. Not the bed, but the bed frame, anyway. So my ex-girlfriend and I, when we first got together, we were both big people. She got gastric bypass and lost a whole bunch of weight, and I managed to lose quite a bit the old natural way, and we're both much healthier people these days. That said, when we first got together, we used to roll up to some restaurants as a tag team and do some damage, man. To be honest, I kind of miss it. Anyway, speaking of damage, early on in the relationship, there were basically entire days spent in the bedroom, and that poor bed frame did take a lot of stress. Eventually, she gave out. The bed frame, not her, and we ended up just putting the mattress on a box spring on the floor and leaving it at that. Unfortunately, for comedy's sake, it wasn't during any couples calisthenic routines or anything like that. I think one day she was just already laying on the bed and I got on top of the bed. Not her, but one of the corners just gave out with a decent ka-thunk. It hasn't happened to me since, but maybe that just means I'm not trying hard enough. Do you have to hold up or push aside your fat in order to access the naughty parts? I mean, sometimes, yeah. It really depends on how big the people involved are. And on top of that, everybody's built differently. Fat can accumulate on pretty much any area of the body. We can't control where exactly it goes in the same way that we can't control where it first starts to disappear when we lose weight. It is what it is. Depending on what you're doing, it's maybe not ideal to have one or even both of your hands full, but keep in mind during your average encounter, there are going to be 4 or more hands available. But I've never been in a situation where things were straight up inaccessible. I mean, it's pretty simple. If there's something in the way of your prize, you got to move it out the way. Are there even people that find fat attractive? Yeah, actually. I mean, I grew up with a lot of negative feelings about my body and my appearance, and if you had asked me when I was a teenager, for example, I probably would have told you that I assume I'm gonna die a virgin. As with a lot of young men, however, my eventual desperation to have more than just my own hands affixed to my nethers came to outweigh my fears of being seen naked by anyone. It definitely wasn't easy for me, and honestly, I almost feel bad for young people these days, because if social media was as big back then as it is now, or things like Tinder existed where pretty much everyone is better looking than me, I might have never had the courage to pursue any kind of human contact. That said, as I got older, I managed to figure out that fat guys do in fact get some, despite what popular opinion might be. I'm not saying it's necessarily common, and I'm definitely not saying it's easy, but it takes all types to make the world go round, and there are almost 8 billion of us on the planet. And sure, a lot of them seem dead set on a particular type that's considered more attractive, but behind closed doors, when it's just you and a private browser window, when the cookies aren't being saved and you stare into that Bing video search with safe search set to off, we all gotta look up some things that the general public isn't meant to be aware of. What I mean is, people may not necessarily advertise their deepest desires in public, but there are absolutely people of all genders who are attracted to those who are overweight. And if you're on the latter end of that equation, it just takes time, patience, and persistence to find what you're looking for. There probably aren't very many people walking around wearing t-shirts that say, "I love fat nerdy guys," because that's a great way to get kidnapped. But there are definitely people who don't necessarily find it unattractive, as well as those who find it very attractive. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but try not to get discouraged if you don't find what you're looking for right away, especially if you're looking for anything more than just a hookup. Don't get me wrong though, the world is full of people who seem to find those things easily, and it's hard not to focus on them sometimes because they're the ones who put themselves out there more often. But it is a numbers game, and it's a patience game, and just like losing weight, you really only lose out if you give up completely. I should say though that if you're looking specifically for someone who's into fat people, you're probably gonna have a lot more luck in terms of pure numbers if you're attracted to men. And I don't know why that is, but if you're batting for both teams, you're gonna have a lot more pitchers than catchers knocking at your door. That does make me briefly want to bring up the idea of hooking up with somebody who fetishizes fat in that way. I've had encounters where it was very clear that their attraction to me had very little to do with me as a person, and that I played kind of a secondary role in whatever fantasy they had going on in their heads. It's almost like I wasn't even in the room. My body was just a prop to help them start whatever kind of avalanche it takes for them to get their rocks off the mountain. Hooking up can be fun, but in that situation, it can be kind of dehumanizing, and in my more promiscuous days, I've left encounters feeling kind of used in a way. It really makes me sympathize with stories that I've heard from some of those who are considered stereotypically attractive and have hordes of people chasing after them. There are a lot of bitter people on the sidelines who come off as resentful because it can seem so easy for them to get laid. But after some of the experiences I've had and those that I've heard about, I can definitely sympathize with somebody who feels like they've had everything else about them as a person thrown away just because they have an attractive set of whatevers. But okay, back to the questions. How do you guys make everything fit together? Well, we have a few different scenarios here, so I'll run through each one individually. The first one is probably the easiest. Skinny guy, fat girl. And if we're speaking strictly in missionary terms, this one is pretty simple. She lays down, spreads eagle, he gets in between and goes to Pound Town without too much difficulty. When you're large and in charge, you can also be very soft, and as I understand it, there are a lot of skinny guys who are into big women for this very reason. So yeah, she's on the bottom, he's on top. No problems. He might have a little trouble finding his target depending on the terrain that he's working with, but I guarantee you if he's in that situation in the first place, he's gonna be pretty determined to get to where he's going. The only downsides to this scenario that I can foresee is that there's probably not going to be a whole lot of activity from her end of the equation, but I'm sure both parties were fully aware of what they were getting into, so the man on top, so to speak, is probably happy enough that he gets to climb the mountain to begin with. That said, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of switching positions in the heat of passion, and depending on the amount of cushion in between them, they may not be able to lean in and kiss each other in the midst of their dirty dancing. Even so, like I said earlier, there are plenty of men out there who are just fine and dandy with that situation. Hitting it from the back may also be a possibility, but depending on the way she's built, player 1 might need an extra long joystick to get the desired results. That said, it should still be a game that many people can play. Alright, so what if she wants to hop on top? Probably doable, but you may have to get a little creative when it comes to facilitating up and down motion. Much like your average plus size male, she may not have a whole lot of stamina herself, and so you may find it easier to just have her kind of hover and have the man under siege do most of the work. Now, standing gymnastics may not be a possibility for our two contestants. At least I can't personally think of a comfortable way to make this happen, but I suppose with enough creative thought and the right kind of acrobatics, anything would be possible. One thing I can say is being in a body of water does add a lot of buoyancy to a situation, and this can enable a lot of things that otherwise aren't on the table. Just don't drown. Okay, well what about fat guy, skinny girl? Well, this one kinda depends, but as long as the ratio of bigness to smallness isn't too off, there's usually no problem with the guy getting on top in this setup. I've definitely been in a situation where I felt a little afraid that I might hurt someone, especially when I was new to these kinds of adult activities, but as I gained more experience, I came to realize that people are generally pretty resilient, and there's a lot of women out there walking around who can withstand a lot more punishment than you might expect and be just fine. Some might even enjoy it, I'd go so far as to say. When I was at my heaviest, I definitely hesitated to even put my full weight on top of someone when it came to that kind of fun time, but I'm happy to say I never caused any suffocation or hip injuries. Now, hitting it from behind is also popular in this scenario, and as long as you got enough length to bridge the gap, so to speak, this fighting style can be a good fit for both players. One issue there, I suppose, is depending on your build, you might find yourself having to lift your gut for better access and then allowing it to elegantly rest on your lovely teammate. This, of course, is provided you can stay on your knees for extended periods, but even if not, you can always stand at the edge of the bed and have her meet you halfway. What if she wants to get on top? This is something a lot of big guys would be into, I'm sure, but there can be some difficulty depending on how wide you are in the hips. It helps if she's taller and thus has longer legs, which would allow for easier straddling, but I'm not gonna lie, I've been in situations where that particular type of enjoyment had to be ruled out because I was just too wide of a pack animal to be mounted properly. Another thing I should mention is fat guys typically don't have a lot of stamina. I mean, everybody's different, but if you're the type of person that likes to have their temperature taken for hours on end, you're probably gonna have to readjust your expectations when you get in bed with the Michelin Man. That said, just because we can't run the marathon doesn't mean that we won't finish first. No, wait, that's not what I mean. Just because we can't run the marathon doesn't mean we can't compete. Every guy's gonna be different, obviously, but the point is you have to be ready to work with the person just as they have to be ready to work with you. On top of that, there's more than one way to ride a horse. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to cook a chicken. There's more than one way to punch a donkey. What? Intimacy doesn't need to involve one specific thing and one thing only. We humans, we have a lot of appendages, a lot of places things can fit, and there are a lot of differently shaped objects out in the world that can be the jigsaw to your puzzle, no matter what you're trying to achieve. It's a team activity. Okay, so what about two people who are obese? So let me tell you about a guy named King Edward VII. My mans was a fan of indulgence, and not only did he enjoy spending a little naked time with other humans, he also enjoyed eating food. A lot of it, as history would tell us. By the time of his death, he was a very large man, and it seems as though he encountered some difficulty encountering his man parts with the proper lady parts in order to continue his hedonistic tendencies. He's famous for a handful of things, and among them is a device known as the love chair, or siège d'amour, and I'm probably not pronouncing that properly. Anyway, it looked like this. Now, I don't have one on hand to show you exactly how it was used, but if you take a look at the bottom there are a couple obvious places for the king to put his feet. And with a little imagination, you could probably guess how any of the willing parties might need to situate themselves for maximum effect. Most people probably can't afford to have their own personal chair handcrafted by a master cabinet maker, but there are things you can do without having to spend any money. Pillows. Everybody got pillows. Put some under the butt. 1, 2, whatever you need to achieve your desired height. Butt goes on the pillows, shoulder and back go against the bed, bada bing, bada disappointment. Along those lines, here's a piece of technology that I recommend everybody employ, regardless of the size of you or your partner. You remember a geometry class? This is a triangle. If you give it a third dimension, you have a triangular prism or a pentahedron. This is a pentahedron with a cushion inside of it. You ever sit on one of these? You know how when you sit on something, normally your ass touches the ground? What would it be like if you sat on one of these, but your shoulders and back were against the ground and your legs were kind of dangling in the air? That'd be a pretty vulnerable position to be in, huh? If someone were to, say, tower over you, they might trip and fall, and things might get mashed together in a way that they normally have some difficulty achieving. It might even increase your depth of perception. It'd probably also make it a lot easier for that person who fell on top of you to kind of, get in and out of that position repeatedly, if they needed to. Barring any accessories, however, there is something you can do that doesn't require any spending as long as your bed is elevated. So I'm gonna drop a little trick of the trade that I came to learn and employ during my heavier days that I found works rather well in terms of spacing, access, and weight distribution. It's actually pretty simple if you think about it. The corner of the bed. If you picture yourself as a large man, sort of straddling the corner of your average bed with as much of the mattress between your legs and under your body as you can manage, you can imagine how that might facilitate things if you were to place some sort of, let's say, penetrable object under you in that scenario. I found it opened up doors that were previously held shut by adipose tissue and other various obstructions, so if you're a big dude, maybe give it a shot, see if there's any improvement. There's also something to be said for bringing props into the bedroom. There are a plethora of devices out there meant to enhance the experience for people of any size, and a lot of them have the potential of being used to compensate for whatever may be lacking in a given situation. This may take some trial and error, but like I said earlier, if you have two willing and determined parties, you can likely achieve any goal that you seek. Being flexible and agile enough to perform any kind of acrobatics is obviously desirable, but it isn't necessary to having a good time, nor is it even a requirement to being a good lover. And this is something that extends beyond body type and can apply to people of all sizes, shapes, and ages. If you're showing up to the party expecting someone to put on a performance for you to critique, I mean, to each his own, but to me that seems kind of selfish, and maybe spending that kind of time with you might not be as much of a privilege as you might think it is. At the end of the day, intimacy is a shared activity with a shared goal, and while there's definitely something to be said for having someone meet you halfway, I'd like to think that the two people embarking on such a journey would be well aware of the person they're with, and before even getting to that point, have a good idea of what to realistically expect from each other. If your goal is to have anyone come back for round 2 and beyond, you're better off learning to communicate, paying attention to the person you're with, and focusing on the shared experience rather than whatever fantasy you might be hoping to act out or any standards you might feel you have to live up to. You're probably not going to find those kind of techniques on any websites that end in hub or hamster or any subreddits that end in wild. There's a place for fantasy in public, but intimacy is a time for two people to shut out the rest of the world and share a connection that's unique, special, and doesn't involve any of the judgment or opinions of anyone else in the outside world. That's kind of why it's called intimacy, because it's meant to be intimate. The true nature of that connection is meant only for the people involved, and what everyone else thinks is literally irrelevant. So go out and get yours, humans, because I'm getting mine. And that's pretty much all I got to say. Last but not least, as always, thank you so much for your time and your support. And thank you especially to everyone who's been leaving comments. Your kind words really help me stay motivated to keep putting myself out there. I will see y'all again soon. Take care.